15%. The laugh came instantly. Victor Hale, CEO of Northbridge Logistics, leaned back in his chair as if I had just told the funniest joke he had heard all year. You're asking for a 15% raise after 12 years. Another short laugh escaped him. For a second, I just stood there, thinking the office felt colder than the weather outside and where I live. It's already pretty chilly. Out of curiosity, what's the temperature where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing, because this moment was only the beginning. I stood there holding the portfolio I had spent weeks preparing, 60 pages documenting the logistics systems I had built, predictive routing algorithms, delivery models, and cost reductions that had saved the company millions. The Aurora distribution system alone reduced delivery delays by 40%, I said quietly. Victor waved his hand dismissively. Everyone contributes something. Cressida. But let's be realistic. His practiced CEO smile never reached his eyes. You're a back-office technician. The board doesn't even know who you are. Something inside me shifted. Not anger. Something colder. My name is Cressida Ward. 34 years old. Senior supply chain systems architect. For 12 years, I had quietly built the infrastructure behind Northbridge's logistics network, while executives celebrated record profits upstairs. I spent nights refining the predictive models that made those profits possible. Victor leaned forward slightly. If you think you're worth more, he said with a shrug, you're free to try somewhere else. I nodded. I understand. A few minutes later, I returned to my cubicle on the 6th floor, and from that moment on, the story began to take a very different turn. Some parts ahead are dramatized and supported by AI for storytelling and educational purposes, and they don't represent any real individuals or organizations. I hope you enjoy the journey, and if tonight isn't the right time for a long story, that's perfectly fine. Get some rest. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time. The cubicle looked the same as it always had. Gray fabric walls, 2 monitors, a coffee mug that had gone cold hours ago. On my screen, a notification popped up from the company newsletter. CEO Victor Hale leads Northbridge's supply chain innovation. I stared at the headline for a long moment. The innovation they were celebrating was the predictive routing system I had built 3 years earlier. 6 months of late nights and weekend testing. The system that had reduced delivery delays across the entire network. Victor had presented it at conferences as if it were his own idea. I leaned back in my chair and opened the drawer beside my desk. Inside was a small black leather notebook. My real work lived there, page after page of algorithms, optimization models, and system architecture diagrams. Ideas I had developed on my own laptop at home. Long after office hours ended, ideas the company had quietly adopted. But something important had never happened. Northbridge had never officially acquired those systems. No intellectual property transfer, no compensation agreement, just implementation. I flipped to a page dated 3 years earlier. At the top, I had written Predictive Logistics Engine Personal Project. That single line changed everything. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I had saved years ago but never called. Adrian Keller, Director of Operations, Meridian Freight, Northbridge's biggest competitor. His last message was still there. If you ever want to talk, Meridian would welcome your expertise. My finger hovered over the call button. For 12 years, loyalty had stopped me. Then I remembered Victor Hale laughing. And suddenly, loyalty didn't feel like loyalty anymore. It felt like a mistake. I pressed call. Adrian Keller answered on the second ring. Cressida Ward, he said immediately, as if he had been expecting my call for years. I was wondering when you might finally reach out. His calm confidence caught me off guard. Do you have time to talk? I asked. I'd rather do this properly. Adrian replied. Dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. There's a restaurant downtown called Blackstone. I'll reserve a table. The line went quiet for a second. Cressida, he added. People like you shouldn't stay invisible forever. 5 hours later, I was sitting across from him in a quiet restaurant that looked far more expensive than anywhere I usually went. Adrian studied me with the kind of curiosity analysts reserve for rare data. I've followed Northbridge's logistics performance for years. He said, "That must be painful." I replied. He smiled. "Not painful. Interesting." He reached into his briefcase and slid a printed report across the table. Delivery metrics, routing efficiency, cost reductions. Every major leap in Northbridge's performance was highlighted in yellow. Each improvement began shortly after you joined the company. Adrian said. I looked up at him. "You reverse engineered the timeline." "We tried to reverse engineer the algorithms," he corrected. "But we couldn't." His eyes narrowed slightly. That's when I realized something important. What Victor Hale didn't build those systems. Silence settled between us. "You did." I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed my black notebook on the table. Adrian looked down at it carefully. "What am I looking at? My personal research." I said, "Systems developed on my own equipment, on my own time." He slowly opened the first page. The diagrams alone were enough to change his expression. "Cressida," he said quietly. "If Meridian had these systems—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. For the first time that night, I allowed myself a small smile. "Then maybe it's time," I said, "to talk about what I'm really worth." Adrian closed the notebook slowly, almost carefully, as if he had just realized he was holding something extremely valuable. For several seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "Now I understand why Northbridge's performance suddenly jumped 4 years ago," he said. I said nothing. Adrian tapped one finger lightly against the notebook. "These systems, predictive routing, adaptive load balancing, automated warehouse prioritization." He looked at me again. "You built all of this alone, mostly at night." I replied, "After work." A faint smile crossed his face. "And Victor Hale thinks you're a replaceable back-office employee." The waiter passed by, refilling our water glasses. Adrian waited until he was gone before speaking again. "Let me be direct. Cressida." He folded his hands together on the table. "Meridian Freight wants you." The words hung in the air between us. "We want you leading our logistics innovation division." He continued. "You'd have your own engineering team, full development resources, and complete ownership over the systems you build." I stayed quiet. Then I asked the question that mattered. "What about compensation?" Adrian didn't hesitate. "Triple your current salary." I blinked. "And equity." He added, "Real equity. If your systems transform our network the way I believe they will, you should benefit from it." I glanced down at the notebook. 12 years of invisible work suddenly felt very heavy. "What about intellectual property?" I asked. Adrian smiled slightly. "Unlike Northbridge, we actually acquire innovations properly. If your systems are personal work, Meridian will purchase licensing rights with full legal protection." For the first time that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not loyalty. Possibility. Adrian leaned forward. "So here's my question," he said quietly. "Are you ready to stop building someone else's empire and start building your own?" I thought about Victor Hale laughing in his office. Then I closed the notebook. "Yes," I said. "I think I am." 2 weeks later, I placed my resignation letter on Victor Hale's desk. He didn't look up at first. His attention stayed on the screen in front of him while he reached for the paper. 2 weeks' notice, he muttered, scanning the page. Then his eyes stopped moving. "Where are you going?" I had considered lying. But in that moment, the truth felt better. Meridian Freight. Victor's head snapped up. "Our competitor," I nodded. For a few seconds, he simply stared at me, calculating something behind his expression. "That's unfortunate timing," he said slowly. "We're negotiating a major expansion contract with Aurora Retail next quarter." "I know," I replied. "I built the logistics model for that proposal." His jaw tightened. Something in the room had changed. The confidence he carried earlier was gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. We should discuss retention options, Victor said. Perhaps the raise you mentioned. I almost laughed. 2 weeks earlier, he had treated the request like a joke. Now it was suddenly negotiable. The offer from Meridian is triple my salary, I said calmly. Plus, equity and leadership authority. Victor leaned back in his chair. They're overpaying, he said quickly. You'll disappoint them once they realize you can't deliver what they expect. For the first time in 12 years, his words didn't carry any weight. We'll see, I replied. My final 2 weeks at Northbridge passed quietly. I documented my systems, trained a junior analyst named Daniel Brooks, and archived every personal project record I had kept over the years. Email trails, design notes, development logs, proof of ownership on my last afternoon. The building looked strangely different. The glass offices, the endless rows of cubicles, 12 years of loyalty contained inside a single corporate floor. At 5:17 on Friday evening, I walked out of Northbridge's headquarters, carrying one laptop bag and my black notebook. On Monday morning, I walked into Meridian Freight's headquarters. This time, the office waiting for me had my name on the door. Cressida Ward, Director of Logistics Innovation. And that was when things truly began to change. If you think I did the right thing by walking away and taking my skills where they would finally be valued, leave a 1 in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. Every opinion shared here helps keep conversations like this alive. 6 weeks after I joined Meridian Freight, the first version of my logistics system went live. The room was quiet when the deployment finished. A wall of monitors displayed live routing data from warehouses across the country. Trucks moved through the network like pieces on a chessboard, adjusting in real time based on demand, weather, and traffic. One of my engineers, Maya Chen, stared at the numbers. Delivery times are already dropping, she said slowly. How much? Adrian asked. She refreshed the dashboard again. 23%. No one spoke for a moment. The system had been running for less than an hour. 2 weeks later, the numbers became impossible to ignore. Operating costs dropped by nearly 30%. Warehouse delays were cut in half. Meridian's network suddenly moved faster than anything in the industry. Clients noticed. The first call came from Aurora Retail, Northbridge's largest account. They wanted a meeting. 3 days later, Meridian's sales team presented the performance data, charts, predictive models, live delivery simulations. Aurora's executives exchanged looks halfway through the presentation. One of them leaned forward. You're saying this system can outperform Northbridge's logistics network? Adrian nodded. Our system already is. The contract moved faster than anyone expected. By the end of the month, Aurora officially announced they were transferring their national distribution agreement from Northbridge to Meridian. The news spread across the industry within hours. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Victor Hale. I watched the name flash on the screen. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, a voicemail appeared. Cressida. This is Victor. We need to talk immediately. Northbridge is prepared to discuss consulting opportunities and a very competitive compensation package. I listened to the message twice. Then I saved it, but I didn't call back. 2 days later, when I walked into Meridian's parking garage after work, someone was standing beside my car. Victor Hale. And he did not look like the man who had laughed in his office 6 weeks earlier. He looked desperate. 2 days after Aurora announced the contract switch, I stayed late at the office. Most of Meridian's floor was already dark. Only the glow of a few monitors lit the hallway when I finally packed my bag and headed for the parking garage. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Victor Hale. I didn't answer. By the time I reached the garage, the building was quiet enough that my footsteps echoed between the concrete walls. That's when I saw him. Victor stood beside my car, hands in the pockets of his expensive coat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Up close, he looked different. The polished confidence he carried in the boardroom was gone. His tie was loosened, his eyes tired. This is inappropriate, I said calmly. You've put 300 jobs at risk, he replied immediately. His voice was low, Strained. Northbridge is facing a crisis because of what you took. I leaned against my car and crossed my arms. I didn't take anything from Northbridge. I said, I took my personal intellectual property. Victor shook his head. That's not how it looks. It looks like corporate espionage. I almost smiled. I documented every algorithm, every development log, every design note, all created on my personal equipment, on my personal time. He stepped closer. You built those systems while you were working for Northbridge, and your legal department never acquired them. I replied, that's not my mistake. Victor's shoulders dropped slightly, for the first time since I'd met him. He looked uncertain. Name your price, he said quietly. Whatever Meridian is paying you, we'll double it. The words hung in the cold air of the garage. I thought about 12 years in that cubicle, 12 years of watching executives take credit for my work, and one moment of laughter when I asked for a 15% raise. You told me something once. I said. Victor frowned. That everyone is replaceable. I opened my car door. I'm just following your advice. Then I got in the car and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the garage. The consequences arrived faster than anyone expected. 2 weeks after Aurora transferred its contract to Meridian, industry reports began circulating. Analysts noticed a sudden shift in logistics performance across the market. Meridian's delivery efficiency had jumped dramatically. Northbridge's had not. At first, the difference looked small, a few percentage points in routing delays, slight increases in warehouse congestion. Nothing that would normally alarm investors. But the numbers kept growing. Without the predictive optimization systems I had built, Northbridge's logistics network began operating the way it had 12 years earlier, slower, less flexible, and far more expensive to maintain. Within a month, the cracks became impossible to hide. Major clients started asking questions. Why were delivery windows suddenly less reliable? Why were costs increasing? Why had Meridian suddenly become faster, inside Meridian's headquarters? The mood was very different. My team expanded from 5 engineers to 14 in less than 6 weeks. Every day, new analysts joined to help scale the systems across our expanding network. On the wall of our operations center, a large screen displayed real-time contract acquisitions. One afternoon, a new notification appeared. Client transfer confirmed Westbridge Retail. Another Northbridge account. Adrian looked at the screen and shook his head slowly. This is turning into a landslide. I understood what he meant. Clients weren't just choosing Meridian because of marketing. They were choosing efficiency, and efficiency was something Northbridge no longer had. The financial markets reacted quickly. Northbridge stock dropped 17% in a single week, then 28%, then 40%. News articles began appearing across business publications. Industry leader Northbridge Logistics faces sudden performance crisis. Executives blamed market conditions, supply chain instability, global transportation costs. But inside the industry, people understood the real reason. Northbridge had built its logistics empire on systems it never truly owned, systems designed by someone they believed was replaceable. Now those same systems were running somewhere else, and the difference was becoming painfully obvious. Northbridge didn't collapse quietly. 3 months after Aurora switched its contract, the response finally came. A lawsuit. The envelope arrived on a Monday morning while I was reviewing system updates with my engineering team. Meridian's legal department brought it directly to my office. Northbridge Logistics versus Cressida Ward. The accusation was exactly what Victor had warned me about in the parking garage. Theft of intellectual property, corporate espionage, unauthorized transfer of proprietary systems. Adrian read through the documents slowly before looking up at me. They're claiming the logistics algorithms belong to Northbridge. That's what Victor always believed. I replied, but belief isn't the same as ownership. Fortunately, this was the moment I had prepared for long before leaving the company. That afternoon, our legal team assembled in the conference room. I placed my black notebook on the table. Next to it came the real evidence. Development logs from my personal computer, cloud backups, time-stamped design drafts, Even old emails where I had explained my ideas to Northbridge executives while clearly labeling them as personal projects. Adrian's attorney, Marcus Lindell, flipped through the documents carefully. "This is better documentation than most patent filings." He said, "I kept records." I replied simply. The court proceedings lasted less than 2 weeks. Northbridge's legal team tried to argue that any work created by an employee belonged to the company. Marcus responded with the employment contract. It was very clear. Only work created using company resources during company time could be claimed by Northbridge. My core systems had been developed at home, on my equipment, on my time. The judge dismissed the case. In the official ruling, he wrote something that spread quickly across the business press. Northbridge Logistics failed to secure legal ownership of the innovations it depended upon. The lawsuit was supposed to damage my reputation. Instead, it confirmed something the entire industry had begun to suspect. Northbridge had never truly understood the technology behind its own success, and the person who built it was no longer working there. The morning after the court dismissed the lawsuit, the news spread quickly across the industry. Business journals called it a historic legal defeat. Technology analysts described it more bluntly. Northbridge had built a billion-dollar logistics operation on systems it never legally owned, within weeks. The consequences followed. Victor Hale resigned from his position as CEO after pressure from the board. Northbridge's stock continued to fall, and several major clients quietly began exploring contracts with Meridian. Meanwhile, life inside Meridian moved forward. My engineering team grew to 30 specialists. Former Northbridge analysts began joining us as well, people who had spent years in the same cubicle rows where I once worked. For the first time, many of them were being recognized for their expertise. One afternoon, Adrian stopped by my office and leaned against the doorframe. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Regret what? Leaving everything that happened to Northbridge after—" I looked out the window toward the skyline for a moment. "I didn't destroy Northbridge," I said finally. "They did that themselves." Adrian nodded slowly. Victor Hale once believed everyone in his company was replaceable. But companies aren't machines. They are built on people, ideas, experience, respect. When those things disappear, the system eventually breaks. Sometimes I think back to that moment in Victor's office. The laughter when I asked for a 15% raise. That moment changed my career. But it also revealed something far more important. The most powerful thing anyone can do is recognize their own value and refuse to let someone else decide it for them. There was a moment in my life when I realized something simple but uncomfortable: loyalty, without respect, slowly turns into silence. And silence can cost you years. I spent more than a decade believing that if I worked hard enough, someone would eventually notice. But work does not speak by itself. People must be willing to listen. What changed everything wasn't revenge or victory. It was the moment I stopped waiting for permission to value my own work. If you were in that situation working quietly while someone else took credit, what would you do? Would you stay and hope things change? Or would you step away and build something new somewhere else? There isn't one perfect answer. But asking that question honestly can change how you see your own career and your own worth. I'm curious where you're listening from right now. Stories like this travel much farther than we expect, and every place in the world has someone facing a similar moment. If this story made you think even a little about your own value, consider subscribing to the channel. One simple click helps stories like this reach someone who might be sitting in a cubicle tonight, wondering if their work matters. Leaving a comment, liking the video, or sharing it might seem small, but those actions can encourage someone else to speak up, take a chance, or finally believe they deserve better. Sometimes the quiet support of strangers becomes the push someone else needed to change their life. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.